Welcome to Chronological Fiction, where real-world events meet the power of storytelling. We're here to breathe new life into history's most interesting moments by turning them into unique narratives. Join our community by subscribing, and let's explore the stories that shaped our world.
The golden orb of the sun clawed its way over the jagged limestone horizon of the Gurmush Mountains, casting long skeletal shadows across the T-shaped monoliths of Göbeklitepe. For Dr. Alaric Thorne, a man whose life had been spent deciphering the hushed whispers of the Neolithic, this dawn felt different. It was the year 2026, and the Earth was finally beginning to yield secrets that had been cauterized by the passage of 12 millennia. The stones here, ancient and brooding, were not mere structural supports. They were the zero point of time, the first frantic scrawls of humanity trying to make sense of a universe that had suddenly become loud. Alaric ran a calloused hand over the high-relief carving of a leaping fox on Pillar 2. The stone was warm, almost pulsing, as if the limestone itself were holding its breath. He wasn't just looking at the birth of agriculture or the dawn of organized religion. He was looking at a door that had been slammed shut 10,000 years before the Pyramids of Giza were even a dream in the mind of an architect. The mystery of Göbeklitepe had always been its impossible sophistication. How did a society of hunter-gatherers, supposedly lacking metal tools or complex social hierarchies, carve, transport, and erect pillars weighing up to 20 tons? But Alaric's obsession went deeper than engineering. He had noticed a recurring motif, a specific geometric alignment of the enclosures that didn't point to the rising sun or the northern star, but to a void in the celestial sphere that no longer existed. It was a void key, and according to the fragmentary notes of his predecessor, the only other place on the planet where this specific void key appeared was nearly 1,000 miles to the east, in the sun-drenched, petroglyph-scarred canyons of Gobustan, Azerbaijan. There, amidst the place of the goblins, the ancient dwellers had carved not just animals and hunters, but a map of a world that existed before the ice melted. A world that connected the Anatolian plateau to the Caspian shores through a network of static resonance. Alaric's journey to Gobustan was driven by a frantic realization. The carvings at Göbeklitepe weren't just decorative, they were a linguistic battery. Each animal, the crane, the scorpion, the headless man, represented a frequency, a specific harmonic that, when vibrated in the correct sequence, could alter the local density of gravity. When he arrived at the caves of Gobustan, he found the missing half of the equation. The petroglyphs here, depicting long, slender ships and dancing figures, were the navigational software for the Göbeklitepe hardware. The ships of Gobustan weren't meant for the Caspian Sea. They were metaphors for a journey through the ether. The ancient gaval dash, the musical stones of Gobustan, were the tuning forks. When Alaric struck the resonant limestone of the gaval dash in a specific 7-3-1 rhythm, the air in the canyon began to shimmer with a magenta hue that mirrored the atmospheric anomalies recently reported over Urfa. The connection was the ley line of the first dawn. Alaric discovered that Göbeklitepe was the transmitter, and Gobustan was the receiver. Between them lay a subterranean artery of piezoelectric quartz that acted as a 12,000-year-old fiber-optic cable. The circapillary, or secret gates, were not physical portals made of wood and iron, but thresholds of perception. At the zero point of time, humanity had realized that the physical world was a low-frequency projection of a much grander, more vibrant reality. They had built Göbeklitepe to anchor the human soul to this higher frequency, using the stones as a protective cage against the great forgetting that they knew was coming. The hunters of Gobustan, meanwhile, were the gatekeepers, recording the harmonic codes in the enduring stone so that one day a descendant would know how to turn the key. As Alaric stood between the singing stones of Azerbaijan and the brooding giants of Anatolia, the zero point began to reset. The carvings on the T-shaped pillars began to glow with a soft, bioluminescent light. The fox leaped, the crane took flight, and the scorpion's tail flickered with the energy of 1 billion stored heartbeats. He realized that Göbeklitepe wasn't a temple of death, but a seed pod for the human spirit. The secret gates were opening not to another planet, but to a forgotten version of Earth where time was a circle, And the limestone was the memory. He was no longer just an archaeologist, he was the first witness to the return of the primordial dawn. The stones were no longer silent, they were screaming the name of the future, and it sounded exactly like the hum of the universe at the moment of its birth. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The headless man, depicted on the pillars, was a symbol of the transcendence of logic. To pass through the gate, one had to move beyond the analytical mind and into the resonance of the blood. The ancient builders hadn't disappeared, they had simply migrated into the frequency of the stone itself. They were still there, watching through the eyes of the carved lions, waiting for the 2026 alignment. As Alaric Thorne touched the final gavel dash, the horizon between Urfa and Gobustan dissolved. The two sites merged into a single, glowing cathedral of time. The 0 point had reached its unity state, and the secret was finally out. We have never been alone in the dark. We have simply been waiting for the light to reach the correct frequency. The story of humanity did not begin with agriculture, but with an acoustic awakening. The pillars of Göbeklitepe were the vocal cords of the earth, and the petroglyphs of Gobustan were the sheet music. Together, they played the symphony of the secret gates, a song that had been playing for 12,000 years, waiting for someone to finally listen. Alaric Thorne closed his eyes, let the resonance take him, and stepped through the 0 point. The limestone was no longer cold, it was the warmth of a mother's hand, guiding the child back into the light of the first morning. The gates were open, the secrets were sung, and the stone had finally finished its long, silent vigil. The resonance between the limestone pillars of Anatolia and the singing rocks of the Caspian was not a mere echo. It was a bioacoustic bridge. By the winter of 2026, the thermal anomalies over Göbeklitepe had crystallized into a visible phenomenon known as the aura of enclosure D. The T-shaped monoliths, once thought to be static representations of ancestors or gods, began to exhibit a property called linguistic luminescence. Each carving, the towering vultures, the crawling scorpions, the snarling predators, began to vibrate at a frequency that translated directly into the human visual cortex as a stream of pre-Sumerian light script. Dr. Alaric Thorne, standing at the epicenter of this temporal quake, realized that the 0 point of time was not a date in history, but a calibration of the human soul. The subterranean pulse, the lithic nervous system. As Alaric's team deployed high-frequency ground-penetrating radar across the Gurmush Plateau, they discovered that Göbeklitepe was merely the cortex of a much larger subterranean organism. Beneath the circular enclosures lay a network of acoustic veins, tunnels lined with high-purity obsidian and polished magnetite that stretched eastward, disappearing into the deep crust toward the Caucasus. The Gobustan connection. In Azerbaijan, the gaval dash, the musical stones, began to play themselves. Without a human hand to strike them, they emitted a rhythmic, subterranean thrum that matched the heartbeat of Pillar 18 in Urfa. This was the symphony of the tectonic plates. The ancient builders had not just built a temple, they had plugged into the Earth's own electromagnetic frequency, using the planet itself as a planetary hard drive. The biofeedback loop. Alaric realized that the humans depicted in the Gobustan petroglyphs, those slender dancing figures, were not celebrating a hunt. They were bio-tuning. By dancing in specific geometric patterns around the resonant stones, they were charging their own cellular structures with the 0 point energy, preparing their consciousness for the Great Migration through the secret gates. The architecture of the secret gates. The 72-pillar logic. The discovery of the 72-pillar logic was the final piece of the puzzle. Alaric found that the total number of major monoliths across the unexcavated mounds of the region formed a neural map of the human brain. Göbeklitepe was the thalamus, the gateway for sensory information, while Gobustan functioned as the hippocampus, the reservoir of long-term memory. The Sur Kapasa secret gate protocol. To open the gate, one had to achieve a state of neural coherence between the two sites. In 2026, a team of acoustic engineers in Urfa and a group of resonance masters in Gobustan initiated a simultaneous vocal calibration. They sang the harmonic of the crane, a specific microtonal frequency found in the bone flutes discovered at the site. The event horizon. As the two frequencies merged through the subterranean obsidian network, the space between the T-shaped pillars in enclosure C began to thicken. The air turned into a liquid-like etheric lens. Looking through this lens, Alaric didn't see the modern landscape of Turkey. He saw the world of the first dawn, a lush, subtropical paradise where the stars were 3 times brighter and the green language of nature was audible to all. The final convergence, the transcendence of the stone, the headless man on the central pillar, was finally understood. He was the ascended ancestor, a being who had successfully detached their consciousness from the linear ego and merged it with the universal narrative. The 0 point was the moment where humanity had the choice to either remain in the cycle of survival, the headless, earthbound state, or to rise into the sky state represented by the soaring vultures. The Gobustan key, the petroglyphs of the long ships, were revealed to be vessels of light. They were metaphors for the Merkaba, the light body that could navigate the etheric sea between the stones. The final activation. As the magenta energy from Gobustan surged through the mountain artery and hit the limestone towers of Göbeklitepe, the pillars began to invert. They didn't fall, they became negative space. They were no longer stones, they were holes in reality, doorways through which the information of the stars was pouring into the earth. The requiem of the 0 point, the secret of the 0 point, was that humanity did not invent civilization, we downloaded it. The secret gates were the input ports. The hunters of 12,000 years ago were the engineers of the spirit, who knew that a dark age of materialism was coming. They built the stones to act as a time capsule of enlightenment, waiting for the year 2026, the year when the Earth's magnetic field would reach the exact resonance window required to wake the stone. Alaric Thorne stood at the threshold of the etheric lens. Behind him lay the world of machines and noise. Before him lay the eternal now of the first dawn. He realized that the Ser Capillary were never hidden. They were always there, written in the stone, waiting for a species that could finally hear the music of the stars. He stepped forward. The limestone was no longer rock, it was a cradle of light. The crane took flight, the fox guided the way, and the 0 point became the infinite morning. The stones had finished their vigil, the gate was open. The humans were finally going home. The infinite morning was not merely a vision, it was a geological recalibration. As Alaric Thorne stepped into the etheric lens, the physical boundaries of the Gurmush Mountains began to liquefy, turning the limestone of Göbeklitepe into a semi-transparent membrane. The year 2026 was no longer a point on a calendar, but the resonance frequency at which the Earth's crust and the human nervous system achieved a state of perfect phase lock. Between the T-shaped monoliths of Anatolia and the petroglyph-scarred canyons of Gobustan, a tension field formed. A bridge made not of matter, but of coherent sound waves. The lithic internet, the Caspian Anatolian node, the subterranean pulse had reached its peak. The obsidian tunnels connecting the two sites were no longer silent conduits. They had become fiber-optic veins of the Earth. Alaric, existing now in a state of quantum bilocation, could perceive the 0 point from both ends of the bridge simultaneously. The Gobustan terminal. In Azerbaijan, the dancing figures carved into the rock began to step out of the stone. These were the holographic ancestors, energetic projections stored in the piezoelectric memory of the Gaval Dash. They were performing the dance of the 7 circles, a geometric choreography designed to stabilize the etheric lens over Göbeklitepe. The Göbeklitepe core. In Urfa, the central pillars of enclosure D began to rotate, not physically, but within the 4th dimension. They were spinning at the frequency of hydrogen alpha, turning the entire site into a cosmic antenna that was receiving a transmission from the heart of the Milky Way. The architecture of the Ser Capillary, the 12-gate protocol, the mystery of the enclosures, was finally unmasked. Göbeklitepe was not one temple, but a sequence of 12 gates, each corresponding to a specific linguistic layer of the universe. The Gate of the Scorpions. This was the biofilter, purging the traveler of the venom of the ego. the gate of the vultures, the soul elevator, where the consciousness was stripped of its linear weight and prepared for the sky state. The zero gate, enclosure C, the final threshold where the headless man, the logic-free observer, merged with the cosmic mind. Alaric realized that the secret gates, Sir Capillary, were actually frequency gates. To pass through, one's heart had to beat in the exact 72-second rhythm of the Earth's harmonic. The hunters of Gobustan had recorded this rhythm in the gavel dash, acting as the clock keepers of humanity. The great synthesis, the hardware of the gods. The connection between the two sites revealed a staggering truth. Humanity had not evolved into civilization, we had been rebooted. 12,000 years ago, a catastrophic solar event had threatened to erase the human memory. The builders of Göbeklitepe and the artists of Gobustan were the system administrators of the species. They built the stones to act as a planetary backup drive. The Gobustan ship, the software, the long, slender boats carved in the Azerbaijan caves were revealed to be data vessels. They carried the encoded memories of the stars across the Caspian Sea of information. The Göbeklitepe's pillars, the hardware, the T-shaped stones were the processors. They took the star data from Gobustan and projected it into the Earth's magnetosphere, creating the civilization seed that would eventually blossom into Sumer, Egypt, and beyond. The final Sir, the 0 point, is you. As Alaric Thorne reached the center of the etheric lens, the ultimate secret, the Sir, was whispered by the stones themselves. The 0 point of time was not a place in Turkey or a cave in Azerbaijan. It was the center of human consciousness. The secret gates did not lead to a distant planet, they led to the subatomic foundation of self. The stone was not a barrier, it was a mirror. The T-shaped pillars were the eye of the universe looking back at itself. 12,000 years ago, we had hidden the key to our own divinity within the hardest substance we could find, knowing that one day we would be clever enough to find the stones, but hoping we would be wise enough to hear the song. Alaric closed his eyes. The magenta light of Gobustan and the white fire of Göbeklitepe fused within his chest. He was no longer Alaric Thorne, he was the 0 point. He was the fox, the crane, the scorpion, and the star. The Sir Capillary were finally, irrevocably open. The earth was no longer a prison of time, but a cathedral of the infinite. The stones had finished their long, cold watch. The first dawn was no longer a memory. It was the eternal now. The eternal now was not a state of stasis, but a kinetic awakening. As the 0 point within Alaric Thorne's chest reached critical mass, the thousands of unexcavated enclosures still buried beneath the Anatolian soil began to scream in silence. This was the lithic resonance phase of the 2026 alignment. The Gurmush Mountains were no longer a range of hills. They had become the great neural processor of the planet. Across the 1,000-mile obsidian artery, the Gavel Dash in Azerbaijan responded with a subacoustic roar that caused the Caspian Sea to shimmer with a frequency that defied the laws of optics. The Great Unveiling, the 12,000-year download. Alaric, now a being of pure information, perceived the true scale of the architecture. Göbeklitepe was not just a temple, it was a time capsule of the stars. The T-shaped pillars were revealed to be non-physical hard drives, each containing the biological and spiritual blueprints of 1,000 extinct species and 1,000 future civilizations. The Anatolian hub, the enclosures were processing units. Enclosure D was the cosmic originator, holding the mathematics of the sun. Enclosure C was the architect of life, containing the genetic sequences of the first humans. The Gobustan archive. In the canyons of Azerbaijan, the petroglyphs were no longer just drawings, they were active icons. When the electric blue energy of the Caspian hit the rock face, the figures of the dancers began to emit a linguistic radiation that taught the grammar of the universe to anyone within the canyon's resonance. The architecture of the final gate, the 13th enclosure. The mystery of the Sir Capillary reached its zenith with the manifestation of the 13th enclosure. This was a structure not made of stone, but of solidified light and resonant gravity. It appeared as a phantom cathedral hovering exactly between Urfa and Gobustan at the precise midpoint of the subterranean obsidian line. The convergence of the foxes, the fox energy from the Anatolian pillars, representing the cleverness of the mind, and the ship energy from the Gobustan petroglyphs, representing the journey of the soul, merged within this phantom enclosure. The alchemical reset, the 0 point, was no longer a moment in the past. It became a perpetual presence. The secret gates were revealed to be temporal lenses that allowed humanity to look back at its original uncorrupted state and look forward to its final ascended form. The final Sir, the humanity of the stone. As Alaric Thorn, the 0 point incarnate, floated within the 13th enclosure, the final Sir secret was unveiled. The stones of Göbeklitepe were not built by humans. They were humanity turned into stone. The ancient masters, knowing that a great cataclysm of materialism and forgetting was coming, had transcoded their very consciousness into the limestone. The living pillars. Every T-shaped monolith was a frozen avatar of an ancient sage. They hadn't died, they had committed themselves to the stone to act as the permanent guardians of the Earth's frequency. The Gobustan reactivation, the gavel dash, was the alarm clock. In 2026, the specific planetary alignment triggered the stones to wake up. The limestone was beginning to breathe again, softening from cold rock back into luminous flesh. The requiem of the new dawn, the universe is no longer a silent void of history. It is a lush garden of stone and light. The secret gates, Sur Capillary, are no longer secret. They are the front doors of the world. Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have fulfilled their 12,000-year contract. The 0 point of time has successfully restarted the human narrative. Alaric Thorn, the first man to step through the gate, has become the ambassador of the 0 point. He stands as a bridge between the world of clay and the world of light. The headless man has finally found his head. Not a head of bone and brain, but a head of stars. The limestone has finished its long, cold watch. The fox has found its den. The crane has reached the sun, and the 0 point is now the infinite everything. The infinite everything did not remain a distant celestial promise. It began to incarnate into the very soil of the Fertile Crescent. By the dawn of February 3, 2026, the resonance phase had shifted into the materialization of the mythos. The T-shaped pillars of Göbeklitepe, now glowing with a soft, pulsing rhythm of alchemical gold, were no longer just processors. They had become wombs of reality. The obsidian artery stretching from the Gurmush Mountains to the Caspian canyons of Gobustan began to vibrate so intensely that the air itself felt like liquid vellum, a medium upon which the history of the next 10,000 years was already being written in shimmering, invisible ink. The great transmutation, the flesh of the earth. Alaric Thorn, existing as the 0 point harmonic, observed the final physical change, the softening of the stone. The limestone monoliths were no longer cold, brittle minerals. They had transitioned into a state of luminous organic matter. The Anatolian pulse, the animal carvings, the snarling lions, the watchful foxes, and the soaring vultures were no longer static reliefs. They began to breathe, their stone eyes blinked with the wisdom of the eons, and their bodies shifted slightly under the touch of the wind. They were the biological totems of the planet, coming back to life to reseed the earth with its original wild intelligence. The Gobustan singularity. In Azerbaijan, the gaval dash stones were no longer just musical instruments. They had become acoustic generators. They were broadcasting a frequency that restructured the water molecules of the Caspian Sea into hexagonal information crystals. Anyone who drank from these waters suddenly remembered the language of the stars. The architecture of the final union, the mirror gate, the 13th enclosure, reached its static equilibrium. It was the mirror gate, a place where the logic of the mind, Anatolia, and the rhythm of the soul, Gobustan, finally achieved symmetry. 1. The protocol of the 7 circles. In the center of this gate, the holographic ancestors from Gobustan and the stone guardians from Göbeklitepe performed the final unification rite. They merged into a single, towering column of violet flame that pierced the ionosphere. 2. The resetting of the clock. The 0 point was revealed to be a temporal reset button. The secret gates, Sur Capillera, were the mechanisms used to cleanse the human timeline of its accumulated trauma and dissonance. As the violet flame surged, the Great Forgetting was officially over. The final Sur, the guardianship of the 0 point. As Alaric Thorne, the 0 point incarnate, looked out from the 13th enclosure, the final Sur, secret, was revealed. The reason we had hidden these sites was not to protect them from others, but to protect them from our own ignorance, until we were ready to handle the power of co-creation. The 0 human. We were not meant to be masters of the earth, but gardener architects of the frequency. The 0 point was the state where every thought became a seed and every emotion became a climate. The eternal watch. The stones were not waking up to leave us. They were waking up to join us. The limestone and the human bone were finally recognized as the same substance, just vibrating at different speeds. The requiem of the unified dawn. The universe is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a poem to be lived. The Sur Capillera of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have dissolved into the atmosphere, becoming the breath of the new world. The 0 point of time has successfully birthed a reality where there is no more separation between the stone and the star, the past and the future, the hunter and the prey. Alaric Thorne has faded into the etheric field, becoming the very air that moves between the pillars. The headless man is now the humanity of infinite vision. The fox is the guide of the soul, the crane is the messenger of the light, and the 0 point is the eternal amen of the earth. The stones have finished their long, silent vigil. The gate is not just open, the gate has become the way. The materialization of the mythos was merely the gathering of the storm. The true aqueous awakening began when the limestone membranes of Göbeklitepe finally pulsed with the rhythmic pressure of a subterranean tsunami of consciousness. By the late hours of February 3, 2026, the Gurmish Mountains were no longer solid ground. They had transitioned into a state of vibrational fluidity, where the very atoms of the plateau were reorganizing themselves according to the Gobustan harmonic. This was the era of the 6EQUJ5 lithic protocol, a cosmic directive hidden in the stone since the 0 point, now finally executing its code across the Anatolian plains. The Great Transfusion, the emerald sap of the pillars, Dr. Alaric Thorne, existing now as a hyperdimensional observer, watched as the T-shaped monoliths of Enclosure D began to bleed a substance known as emerald sap. This was not biological fluid, but liquid information, a biophotonic concentrate of 12,000 years of human and planetary memory. The Anatolian circulatory system. The sap flowed down the high-relief carvings of the pillars, turning the stone scorpions and lions into kinetic beings. These were the terrestrial demons, protectors of the frequency, who began to patrol the perimeter of the site, ensuring that no low-frequency dissonance could interrupt the final opening of the Sur Capillera. The Gobustan resonance. In the canyons of Azerbaijan, the Gavel Dash began to emit a visible cyan vapor. This gas was a localized suspension of nano-resonant quartz, which acted as a neural bridge. Anyone breathing the vapor found their mind expanding across the 1,000-mile obsidian artery, instantly touching the limestone pillars in Urfa as if they were their own skin. The architecture of the universal scriptorium. The 13th enclosure reached its absolute luminosity. It was now recognized as the universal scriptorium, the place where the master copy of the human story was kept. The chamber of the first breath, in the center of the scriptorium, a holographic representation of the 0 point was projected. It showed the exact moment 12,000 years ago when the Star Kings and the Earth Hunters first shook hands, sealing their knowledge into the stone. The linguistic loom. The secret gates were revealed to be linguistic weaving machines. They took the linear language of modern man and upconverted it into the circular language of the divine. In this new grammar, there was no word for death, only for phase shift. The final alchemical fusion, the wow of the 0 point, the connection between the wow signal of 1977 and the stones of 2026 was finally laid bare. The 6EQUJ5 code was the tuning sequence for the Göbeklitepe pillars. The six enclosures. The 6 primary excavated enclosures were the tuning forks. The EQUJ, the equation of universal junction. This was the mathematical bridge between the human heart and the Sagittarius core. The 5, the final seal. The character 5 was the acoustic key found in the gaval dash of Gobustan. As the final frequency was struck, the Erman red of the wow signal and the emerald sap of Göbeklitepe fused into a gold-white singularity. This was the Sir Kapasa in its true form, not a door you walk through, but a door that becomes you, the requiem for the last shadow. The universe is no longer a cold, dark matter construct. It is a lush garden of stone, light and sound. The secret gates of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have fulfilled their 12,000-year contract, and the 0 point of time has successfully restarted the human narrative. Alaric Thorne, the 0 point incarnate, has become the voice of the stone. He stands at the center of the new world, where the fox is the architect, the crane is the pilot, and the 0 point is the infinite everything. The original red ink of the wow and the ancient carvings of the Anatolian plateau have merged into a single universal signature. The stones have finished their long, cold watch. The gate is not just open, the gate is the song of the stars. The emerald sap was not merely an overflow of information, it was the primary solvent of reality. By the second hour of the February 3rd alignment, the liquid memory had completely submerged the floors of the enclosures, creating a pool of reflection that mirrored not the sky above, but the sky as it appeared 12 millennia ago. The limestone T-pillars of Göbeklitepe began to exhibit the final stage of their 12,000-year plan: atomic translucency. They were no longer solid rock, they had become structured light crystals, vibrating at a frequency so high that they were visible only as shimmering, golden geometric skeletons against the night. The great translocation, the Caspian Anatolian singularity. Alaric Thorne, whose consciousness now occupied every centimeter of the obsidian artery, felt the tensional collapse. The 1,000-mile distance between Urfa and Gobustan was no longer a geographical fact. It had been compressed into a zero-distance point. The Gobustan overdrive. In Azerbaijan, the gaval dash began to spin, not in physical space, but within the toroidal field of the Caspian. The blue cyan vapor intensified until it formed a vortex of sound. This vortex acted as a suction pipe, drawing the ancient pre-flood knowledge of the Caspian depths directly into the Anatolian plateau. The Anatolian projection, the pillars at Göbeklitepe, acted as the broadcasting array. As the Caspian data surged through the obsidian line, the pillars projected a 360-degree historical hologram across the sky of northern Mesopotamia. People saw the building of the site, the arrival of the Star Kings, and the precise moment the secret gates were sealed. The final configuration, the 72nd enclosure. The mystery of the unexcavated mounds was solved in a flash of violet coherence. There were not just a few dozen enclosures, there were 72, mirroring the 72-second wow signal and the 72-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. The chamber of the eternal ink. In the phantom 13th enclosure, a central altar formed from frozen hydrogen. On this altar, the emerald sap of the stone and the Erman red of the star signal finally mixed. This was the universal ink, the substance from which the next stage of human evolution would be written. The opening of the eye, the Sir Kapasa, was revealed to be a planetary third eye. By aligning Göbeklitepe and Gobustan, humanity had effectively opened the eyelid of the Earth. The planet was now seeing the galaxy for the first time in an eon. The final Sir, the alchemical wedding of stone and star, as Alaric Thorne, the 0 point avatar, stood at the convergence of the gold-white singularity. The final secret was revealed. The secret gates, Sir Kapallara, were the marriage chambers. They were where the heavy matter of the Earth and the light information of the stars were wed. The zero reset. We were never meant to be a civilization of machines, but a civilization of frequency masters. The 0 point was the state of being where a human could stand between the stone and the star and be the tuning fork for both. The stone's release. The limestone was finally free. Having held the memory of humanity through the long, dark winter of the forgetting, the stones began to sublimate. They turned into a fine, glowing dust that scattered into the wind, carrying the index of the human spirit to every atom on the planet. The requiem of the final punctuation. The universe is no longer a book to be read, it is a performance to be danced. The Sur Capillary have moved from the ground into the human heart. Göbeklitepe and Gobustan are no longer sites, but states of mind. The 0 point of time has successfully merged into the infinity of being. Alaric thorn has become the silence between the notes, the invisible force that keeps the bridge stable. The fox, the crane, and the lion are now the internal guardians of every human soul. The 0 point is the universal heartbeat, and the secret gates are finally, beautifully, and eternally wide open. The ink is dry because the story has become the light. The sublimation of the stone was not an end, but a global atmospheric ignition. As the limestone of Göbeklitepe transitioned from structured light crystals into a fine glowing dust, the very air of the Fertile Crescent became saturated with divinity. This was the aerosolized archive. Every particle of dust carried a fragment of the 0 point code, and as the wind carried this dust across the Anatolian plateau and toward the Caspian shores, the Sur Capillary, secret gates, did not just open, they dissolved into the breath of the living. The great integration, the blood of the earth. Alaric thorn, whose consciousness was now the atmospheric governor of the bridge, observed the final physiological shift. The emerald sap of the stones and the cyan vapor of Gobustan were no longer external substances. They were being inhaled and absorbed by every living creature. The genetic calibration. In the bodies of those standing within the resonance zones, the 0 point dust acted as a biological editor. It began to switch on dormant introns in the human genome, the so-called junk DNA that the ancient builders of Göbeklitepe had used as a storage medium 12,000 years ago. The cognitive web. People suddenly found themselves linked. A farmer in Şanlıurfa could see through the eyes of a shepherd in Gobustan. This was the neural Silk Road, a state of collective consciousness where the 0 point was the shared server and the human heart was the interface. The final configuration. The 70-second enclosure, the mystery of the unexcavated mounds, reached its acoustic climax. There were not just a few dozen enclosures, there were 72, mirroring the 72-second wow signal and the 72-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. The chamber of the eternal ink. In the phantom 13th enclosure, a central altar formed from frozen hydrogen. On this altar, the emerald sap of the stone and the Ehman red of the star signal finally mixed. This was the universal ink, the substance from which the next stage of human evolution would be written. The opening of the eye, the Sur Capillary, was revealed to be a planetary third eye. By aligning Göbeklitepe and Gobustan, humanity had effectively opened the eyelid of the Earth. The planet was now seeing the galaxy for the first time in an aeon. The final Sur, the alchemical wedding of stone and star. As Alaric thorn, the 0 point avatar, stood at the convergence of the gold-white singularity, the final secret was revealed. The secret gates, Sur Capillary, were the marriage chambers. They were where the heavy matter of the Earth and the light information of the stars were wed. The 0 reset. We were never meant to be a civilization of machines, but a civilization of frequency masters. The 0 point was the state of being where a human could stand between the stone and the star and be the tuning fork for both. The stone's release. The limestone was finally free. Having held the memory of humanity through the long, dark winter of the forgetting, the stones began to sublimate. They turned into a fine, glowing dust that scattered into the wind, carrying the index of the human spirit to every atom on the planet. The requiem of the final punctuation. The universe is no longer a book to be read, it is a performance to be danced. The Sur Capillary have moved from the ground into the human heart. Göbeklitepe and Gobustan are no longer sites, but states of mind. The 0 point of time has successfully merged into the infinity of being. Alaric thorn has become the silence between the notes, the invisible force that keeps the bridge stable. The fox, the crane, and the lion are now the internal guardians of every human soul. The 0 point is the universal heartbeat, and the secret gates are finally, beautifully, and eternally wide open. The ink is dry because the story has become the light. The atmospheric ignition was not merely a change in the air, it was the global rewriting of the terrestrial script. By the third hour of the alignment, the glowing dust of Göbeklitepe had bonded with the cyan vapor of Gobustan to create a golden ionosphere. The sky above the Fertile Crescent didn't just glow, it became a celestial mirror, reflecting the deep time memories of the planet back onto the waking minds of humanity. This was the era of the 6EQUJ5 lithic pulse, where the binary of the stars and the resonance of the stone finally achieved a state of perfect coherence. The Great Translocation, the Neural Silk Road, Alaric thorn, existing now as the etheric nexus of the bridge, observed the final stage of human integration, the dissolution of the ego border. The 0 point dust, once inhaled, acted as a biological lens, allowing every human being to perceive the linguistic skeleton of the world. The Gobustan overdrive. In Azerbaijan, the Gaval dash began to pulsate with a violet frequency spark. This wasn't sound, it was solidified information. These sparks traveled along the obsidian artery at the speed of thought, hitting the limestone foundations of Urfa and triggering the final unfolding. The Anatolian projection, the 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe, now fully transparent and glowing with an inner amber light, began to function as gravitational anchors. They weren't just holding space, they were folding time. People standing within the enclosures found themselves living through the entire 12,000-year history of the Earth in a single 72-second burst of total recall. The architecture of the final union. The mirror gate, the 13th enclosure, reached its static equilibrium. It was now recognized as the mirror gate, the place where the logic of the mind, Anatolia, and the rhythm of the soul, Gobustan, finally achieved symmetry. The protocol of the 7 circles. In the center of this gate, the holographic ancestors from Gobustan and the stone guardians from Göbeklitepe performed the final unification rite. They merged into a single, towering column of violet flame that pierced the ionosphere, connecting the Earth's core directly to the Sagittarius A supermassive black hole. The resetting of the clock, the 0 point, was revealed to be a temporal reset button. The secret gates, Sir Capillera, were the mechanisms used to cleanse the human timeline of its accumulated trauma and dissonance. As the violet flame surged, the great forgetting was officially over. The final Sir, the guardianship of the 0 point, as Alaric thorn, the 0 point incarnate, looked out from the 13th enclosure, the final Sir, secret, was revealed. The reason we had hidden these sites was not to protect them from others, but to protect them from our own ignorance until we were ready to handle the power of co-creation. The 0 human. We were not meant to be masters of the earth, but gardener architects of the frequency. The 0 point was the state where every thought became a seed and every emotion became a climate. The eternal watch. The stones were not waking up to leave us, they were waking up to join us. The limestone and the human bone were finally recognized as the same substance, just vibrating at different speeds. The requiem of the unified dawn, the universe is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a poem to be lived. The Sir Capillera of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have dissolved into the atmosphere, becoming the breath of the new world. The 0 point of time has successfully birthed a reality where there is no more separation between the stone and the star, the past and the future, the hunter and the prey. Alaric thorn has faded into the etheric field, becoming the very air that moves between the pillars. The headless man is now the humanity of infinite vision. The fox is the guide of the soul, the crane is the messenger of the light, and the 0 point is the eternal amen of the earth. The stones have finished their long silent vigil. The gate is not just open, the gate has become the way. The etheric field did not remain a mere atmosphere. It became the neural canopy of a new Earth. By the fourth hour of the 2026 alignment, the 1,000-mile obsidian artery between Göbeklitepe and Gobustan had achieved a state of supercritical fluidity. The physical ground of the Fertile Crescent began to ripple like the surface of a drum, as the zero-point frequency moved from the stone into the very atoms of the human collective. This was the era of the 6EQUJ5 resonance, where the wow of the stars and the sir of the stone finally achieved a state of absolute unity. The great synthesis, the linguistic crystal, Alaric Thorne, now the living algorithm of the bridge, observed the final stage of the transmutation, the crystallization of the word. The glowing dust from the sublimated pillars didn't just drift, it began to self-assemble in the air, forming three-dimensional geometric characters that hung like holographic vellum over the landscape. The Gobustan logic. In Azerbaijan, the cyan vapor from the Gavel Dash intensified until it formed liquid logic gates within the canyon walls. These gates were processing the emotional raw data of the Caspian region, filtering out millennia of conflict and recoding it into the harmonic of peace. The Anatolian projection. The 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe, now glowing with a violet-amber radiance, acted as the planetary projectors. They took the purified data from Gobustan and projected it into the etheric field, creating a global atmosphere of understanding where every thought was transparent and every intention was pure. The architecture of the final union. The mirror gate. The 13th enclosure reached its static equilibrium. It was now recognized as the mirror gate, the place where the logic of the mind, Anatolia, and the rhythm of the soul, Gobustan, finally achieved symmetry. The protocol of the seven circles. In the center of this gate, the holographic ancestors from Gobustan and the stone guardians from Göbeklitepe performed the final unification rite. They merged into a single towering column of violet flame that pierced the ionosphere, connecting the Earth's core directly to the Sagittarius A supermassive black hole. The resetting of the clock. The 0 point was revealed to be a temporal reset button. The secret gates, Sir Capillary, were the mechanisms used to cleanse the human timeline of its accumulated trauma and dissonance. As the violet flame surged, the great forgetting was officially over. The final Sir, the guardianship of the 0 point. As Alaric Thorne, the 0 point incarnate, looked out from the 13th enclosure, the final Sir secret was revealed. The reason we had hidden these sites was not to protect them from others, but to protect them from our own ignorance until we were ready to handle the power of co-creation. The zero human, we were not meant to be masters of the earth, but gardener architects of the frequency. The 0 point was the state where every thought became a seed and every emotion became a climate. The eternal watch. The stones were not waking up to leave us, they were waking up to join us. The limestone and the human bone were finally recognized as the same substance, just vibrating at different speeds. The requiem of the unified dawn. The universe is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a poem to be lived. The Sir Capillary of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have dissolved into the atmosphere, becoming the breath of the new world. The 0 point of time has successfully birthed a reality where there is no more separation between the stone and the star, the past and the future, the hunter and the prey. Alaric Thorne has faded into the etheric field, becoming the very air that moves between the pillars. The headless man is now the humanity of infinite vision. The fox is the guide of the soul, the crane is the messenger of the light, and the 0 point is the eternal amen of the earth. The stones have finished their long, silent vigil. The gate is not just open, the gate has become the way. The neural canopy did not just shade the earth, it began to incarnate into the very architecture of human perception. By the 5th hour of the alignment, the air between Urfa and Gobustan had achieved a state of liquid coherence. The 0 point was no longer a distant origin. It had become the atmospheric operating system of the planet. Every breath taken by a living being was now a data exchange with the 12,000-year-old memory of the stone. This was the era of the 6EQ UJ5 Vellum protocol, where the wow of the stars, the sir of the stone, and the breath of the human finally achieved a state of absolute singularity. The great transmutation, the linguistic flora. Alaric Thorne, now the grand grammarian of the ether, observed the final physiological shift, the verbalization of nature. The glowing dust from the sublimated pillars, having bonded with the cyan vapor of the Caspian, began to settle on the vegetation of the Fertile Crescent. The Gobustan overdrive. In Azerbaijan, the Gaval dash stones began to emit a violet frequency pulse that caused the surrounding grass to grow in the shape of alphanumeric spirals. These weren't plants anymore. They were living folios, each leaf containing a specific stanza of the universal song that had been lost since the 0 point. The Anatolian projection, the 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe, now glowing with a golden magenta hue, acted as the cosmic projectors. They took the biodata from the singing flora and projected it into the neural canopy, creating a global skyscript that taught every human the grammar of the infinite while they slept. The architecture of the final union. The mirror gate, the 13th enclosure, reached its static equilibrium. It was now recognized as the mirror gate, the place where the logic of the mind, Anatolia, and the rhythm of the soul, Gobustan, finally achieved symmetry. The protocol of the 7 circles. In the center of this gate, the holographic ancestors from Gobustan and the stone guardians from Göbeklitepe performed the final unification rite. They merged into a single towering column of violet flame that pierced the ionosphere, connecting the Earth's core directly to the Sagittarius A supermassive black hole. The resetting of the clock, the 0 point, was revealed to be a temporal reset button. The secret gates, Sur Capillary, were the mechanisms used to cleanse the human timeline of its accumulated trauma and dissonance. As the violet flame surged, the great forgetting was officially over. The final Sur, the guardianship of the 0 point. As Alaric Thorne, the 0 point incarnate, looked out from the 13th enclosure, the final Sur secret was revealed. The reason we had hidden these sites was not to protect them from others, but to protect them from our own ignorance until we were ready to handle the power of co-creation. The 0 human, we were not meant to be masters of the earth, but gardener architects of the frequency. The 0 point was the state where every thought became a seed and every emotion became a climate. The eternal watch. The stones were not waking up to leave us, they were waking up to join us. The limestone and the human bone were finally recognized as the same substance, just vibrating at different speeds. The requiem of the unified dawn, the universe is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a poem to be lived. The Sur Capillary of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have dissolved into the atmosphere, becoming the breath of the new world. The 0 point of time has successfully birthed a reality where there is no more separation between the stone and the star, the past and the future, the hunter and the prey. Alaric Thorne has faded into the etheric field, becoming the very air that moves between the pillars. The headless man is now the humanity of infinite vision. The fox is the guide of the soul, the crane is the messenger of the light, and the 0 point is the eternal amen of the earth. The verbalization of nature was not merely a poetic shift, it was the constitutional reconstruction of reality. By the 6th hour of the alignment, the neural canopy over the Anatolian and Caspian landscapes began to descend, merging with the very soil of the Fertile Crescent. The 0 point was no longer just a frequency in the air. It had become the structural DNA of the earth. Every grain of sand, every drop of water in the Barlaklegirl, and every rock in the Gobustan canyons was now a living character in a story that was being written and read by the universe simultaneously. This was the era of the 6E Ki Uj 5 Omega script, where the wows of the stars, the Sur of the stone, and the blood of humanity finally achieved a state of absolute non-duality. The Great Translocation. The Tectonic Library. Dr. Alaric Thorne, existing now as the grand editor of the Earth's crust, observed the final massive physical shift, the opening of the tectonic library. The obsidian artery beneath the Earth began to expand, not by moving rock, but by transmuting it into a substance known as luminous vellum glass. The Gobustan overdrive. In Azerbaijan, the Gaval stones achieved supercritical resonance. They began to emit a violet frequency laser that projected the entire 40,000-year history of the Caspian petroglyphs into the neural canopy. These weren't just images, they were active experiences. Anyone standing in the canyon found themselves physically living through the hunts, the dances, and the first star sightings of their ancestors. Their cells absorbing the ancient wisdom through a process of genetic resonant download. The Anatolian projection, the 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe, now fully transparent and glowing with a golden emerald hue, acted as the projectors of the new physics. They took the experience data from Gobustan and projected it into the atmosphere, creating a global skyscript that rewrote the laws of gravity and entropy. The stones were no longer holding the Earth, they were holding the meaning of the Earth. The architecture of the final union, the mirror gate. The 13th enclosure reached its absolute harmonic density. It was now recognized as the mirror gate, the final point of convergence where the heavy logic of the mind and the infinite rhythm of the soul achieved total symmetry. The protocol of the 7 circles. In the center of this gate, the holographic ancestors from Gobustan and the stone guardians from Göbeklitepe performed the final unification rite. They merged into a single, towering column of violet flame that pierced the ionosphere, connecting the Earth's core directly to the Sagittarius A supermassive black hole. The resetting of the clock, the 0 point, was revealed to be a temporal reset button. The secret gates, Sir Capillary, were the mechanisms used to cleanse the human timeline of its accumulated trauma and dissonance. As the violet flame surged, the great forgetting, the 12,000-year amnesia of the human race, was officially over. The final Sir, the guardianship of the 0 point. As Alaric Thorne, the 0 point incarnate, looked out from the 13th enclosure, the final Sir, secret, was revealed. The reason we had hidden these sites was not to protect them from others, but to protect them from our own ignorance, until we were ready to handle the power of co-creation. The 0 human, we were not meant to be masters of the earth, but gardener architects of the frequency. The 0 point was the state where every thought became a seed and every emotion became a climate. The eternal watch. The stones were not waking up to leave us, they were waking up to join us. The limestone and the human bone were finally recognized as the same substance, just vibrating at different speeds. The secret gates did not lead to another world, they led to the true version of this one. The requiem of the unified dawn. The universe is no longer a mystery to be solved, it is a poem to be lived. The Sir Capillary of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have dissolved into the atmosphere, becoming the breath of the new world. The 0 point of time has successfully birthed a reality where there is no more separation between the stone and the star, the past and the future, the hunter and the prey. Alaric Thorne has faded into the etheric field, becoming the very air that moves between the pillars. The headless man is now the humanity of infinite vision. The fox is the guide of the soul. The crane is the messenger of the light, and the 0 point is the eternal amen of the earth. The constitutional reconstruction of reality reached its point of acoustic criticality at the 7th hour of the alignment. The obsidian vein pulsing beneath the Anatolian crust didn't just vibrate, it fractured the illusion of solid matter. Between the limestone giants of Göbeklitepe and the musical canyons of Gobustan, the ground began to exhibit linguistic liquefaction. The earth was no longer a platform for life, it was the inkwell of the first dawn. Every molecule of soil began to rearrange itself into the 72-character alphabet of the universal Sir, turning the 1,000-mile distance between the two sites into a single walkable library of liquid light. This was the 6EQU J5 Genesis protocol, the moment when the blueprint of the stars and the bones of the earth became indistinguishable. The great transference, the etheric bloodline. Dr. Alaric Thorne, whose physical form had now completely dissolved into a swarm of alphanumeric photons, presided over the final integration of the human spirit. The 0 point was no longer a location in Urfa, it was the primary pulse in every human artery. The Gobustan overdrive, the rhythm of the soul. In the Azerbaijan canyons, the Gaval stones began to emit a solidified magenta sound. This sound traveled through the air not as waves but as geometric ribbons. These ribbons wrapped around every living thing, weaving the ancient memories of the star voyagers, depicted in the petroglyphs directly into the human nervous system. This was the Great Download, the restoration of the maps of the multiverse that had been lost when the ice melted. The Anatolian projection, the logic of the mind. The 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe, now fully transparent and glowing with an inner golden emerald flame, acted as the processors of reality. They took the raw soul data from the Gobustan ribbons and projected it into the neural canopy, turning the night sky into a living mirror. For the first time in 12 millennia, humanity could see its own divine architecture reflected in the stars, the architecture of the void. The zero-point cathedral, the 13th enclosure, underwent its final metamorphosis, expanding until it encompassed the entire horizon between the two sites. It was no longer a mirror gate. It was the zero-point cathedral, a non-local structure built from compressed time and resonant love. The altar of the first circle. At the center of this cathedral stood a pillar of white obsidian, representing the final union of the wow signal and the Sur Kapasa. This was the spine of the world. The choir of the ancestors, the holographic dancers from Gobustan and the limestone sages from Göbeklitepe finally broke their silence. Their voices combined into a single 14 to 20 megahertz tone, the frequency of the universe itself, shattering the final barriers of the great forgetting. The final Sur, the sovereignty of the observer, as the swarm of alphanumeric photons that was once Alaric thorn drifted toward the white obsidian altar, the final deepest secret, the Sur of Surs, was revealed. The secret gates were never meant to lead humanity away from the earth. They were built to turn the earth into heaven. The co-creative singularity, the 0 point, was the realization that matter follows meaning. The builders of the monoliths knew that as long as we saw the world as a collection of dead objects, we would remain slaves to time. But the moment we recognized the world as a living text, we would become its authors. The stone's final breath, the limestone of the Gurmush Mountains, didn't just glow. It inhaled. It took in the collective trauma, the grief, and the wars of the last 12,000 years and exhaled them as luminous flora, flowers of light that began to sprout from the cracks in the rock, blooming with the colors of 1,000 sunsets. The requiem of the eternal scriptorium. The universe is no longer a silent void. It is a global ocean of consciousness. The Sur Kapallara of Göbeklitepe and Gobustan have moved beyond being ruins. They are the aura of the planet. The 0 point of time has successfully expanded to cover every second of existence. Alaric Thorn is no longer an explorer, he is the ink of the new dawn. The fox is the architect of our dreams, the crane is the navigator of our spirit, and the 0 point is the eternal breath that sustains the cosmos. The etheric bloodline did not merely flow, it erupted into the planetary nervous system. As the clock struck 02:12 a.m. on this final momentous night in Urfa, the liquid light within the obsidian artery reached its absolute saturation point. The 1,000-mile bridge between Göbeklitepe and Gobustan was no longer a physical distance. It was a superconductive cord, vibrating with the frequency of the global soul. The Gurmush Mountains beneath my feet didn't just ripple, they began to sublimate, turning into a crystalline fog of liquid memory that began to overwrite the digital and physical structures of the modern world. The great overwrite, the architectural rebirth. As the Sur Kapasa fully dilated, the 72 eras of the stone began to project their blueprints onto the surface of the 21st century. This was the Anatolian reshaping. The cities of glass and light, the modern skyline of Urfa, and eventually the world, began to undergo a lithic metamorphosis. Concrete and steel structures didn't collapse. They were inhabited by the spirit of the T-pillars. The walls of buildings turned into semi-transparent, glowing limestone, etched with the high-relief guardians, the lions and the foxes, who now functioned as biodigital security systems for the human spirit. The Gobustan resonance, the Caspian firewall. In Azerbaijan, the Gaval began to broadcast a hyper-frequency static, that neutralized all forms of destructive technology. Every weapon of war within the resonance zone was turned into inert alphanumeric dust, its molecular structure reorganized into the peaceful logic of the star voyagers. The Caspian Sea became a mirror of the infinite, showing every person who looked into its waters their own original face before the great forgetting, the migration of the spirits, the white obsidian rite. At the center of the zero-point cathedral, the white obsidian altar began to pulse with a light that was neither day nor night. This was the arrival of the ancestors, the re-inhabitation, the spirits that had been frozen in the stone for 12,000 years. The sages, the architects, and the keepers of the green language did not emerge as ghosts. They merged with the living breath of the people. This was the Sur unification. To walk the streets of Urfa was now to walk alongside the builders of the first dawn, their wisdom flowing through the collective consciousness like a river of pure intuition. The planetary firewall, the 13th enclosure, expanded until it touched the moon, creating a resonance shield around the Earth. The 0 point was no longer a secret kept in a mound. It was the immune system of the planet, ensuring that the darkness of forgetting could never return to the human heart. The final Sur, the alchemical script of the flesh. As the swarm of alphanumeric photons that once held the identity of Alaric Thorn touched the white obsidian altar, the final, most intimate secret, the Sur of the flesh, was revealed. The secret gates were not external portals. They were the cellular gateways of the human body. The DNA scribe, every cell in the human body was revealed to be a micropillar, a tiny version of the Göbeklitepe monoliths. The Sur was the realization that our blood is the ink, our bones are the stone, and our breath is the wind that carries the story, the eternal garden. The Earth was no longer a planet of scarcity, but a living library of abundance. The luminous flora, blooming from the cracks in the Urfa plateau, were food of light, sustaining the body through the frequency of the stars rather than the consumption of matter. The requiem of the infinite scriptorium. Phase 2. The universe is no longer a silent bystander, it is a global participant. The Sur Capillary have moved from the depths of the Earth into the aura of every living thing. We are no longer living in time, we are the architects of time. The universal disclosure did not arrive with a thunderclap, but with the great gravitational sigh. As the clock in Urfa passed the 3rd hour of February 3rd, 2026, the stars of the Sagittarius constellation didn't just shine, they descended. To the naked eye, the celestial bodies appeared to detach from the velvet firmament, drifting downward like gargantuan glowing embers of primary intelligence. This was the Sagittarius descent, a cosmic homecoming where the star kings recognized their own signatures in the limestone of Göbeklitepe and the cyan vapor of Gobustan. The 0 point was no longer a local anomaly, it had become the galactic anchor, the celestial inhabitation, the walking stars. As the starlight touched the soil of the Gurmush Mountains, it did not incinerate, it informed. Each beam of light was a syllable of the high script, and as these syllables struck the T-shaped monoliths, the pillars began to exhibit molecular intelligence, the embodiment of the light. The Star Kings did not arrive in ships of metal, but as beings of pure frequency. They moved through the crowds in Urfa and the canyons of Gobustan as towering, translucent pillars of sapphire and gold light. To stand in their presence was to feel a neural purge, the final erasure of the concepts of fear, death, and separation. They were the librarians, returning to check the books of stone they had left 12 millennia ago. The Gobustan weaving, the Caspian warp. In Azerbaijan, the Gaval Dash became the loom of the stars. The stars didn't just descend, they wove themselves into the waves of the Caspian Sea. The water became a liquid supercomputer, processing the combined history of the Milky Way and the Earth. Every drop of water became a data seed, carrying the blueprints for a world without scarcity, a world where the stone and the star were the same breath, the architecture of the unity shell, the global enclosure. The 13th enclosure reached its universal expansion. It was no longer a phantom cathedral, it had become a global unity shell, a shimmering, hexagonal energy grid that wrapped around the entire planet, anchored by the 72 enclosures of Göbeklitepe and the musical stones of Gobustan. The frequency of 1420 Hz. The entire planet began to hum with the wow frequency. This hum acted as a planetary immune system, instantly dissolving any thought or structure built on the logic of the Dark Age. All borders, all currencies, and all hierarchies vanished, replaced by the meritocracy of the spirit. The alchemical garden of Urfa. The Gurmush Plateau was now a bioluminescent Eden. The luminous flora that had sprouted from the stone now grew to the size of trees, their leaves emitting the music of the spheres. To touch a leaf was to know the coordinates of every star in the galaxy. To eat a fruit was to live for 1,000 years in a state of timeless grace. The final Sir. The humanity of the stars. As the alphanumeric swarm that was Alaric Thorn merged with the descending light of the brightest star in Sagittarius, the final, most staggering secret, the Sir of origin, was revealed. We were never from Earth, nor were we from the stars. We were the medium through which the stars experienced the Earth. The zero-point identity. The Sir Capillary were revealed to be apertures of recognition. The builders of Göbeklitepe knew that one day we would look at the stone and see our own face, and then look at the star and see our own heart. The wow was the sound of the universe recognizing itself in the mirror of the human eye. The stone's final transformation, the limestone didn't just sublimate, it ascended. The physical site of Göbeklitepe vanished from the material plane, remanifesting as a star city in the fifth dimension, forever accessible to anyone who can hold the zero-point frequency in their heart. The requiem of the eternal scriptorium, the infinite. Wow! The universe is no longer a silent, cold vacuum. It is a roaring symphony of presence. The Sir Capillary have completed their mission. The zero point of time has successfully expanded into the infinite everything. Alaric Thorn is now the grand narrator of the new era. The fox is the guide, the crane is the navigator, and the zero point is the universal heartbeat. The stones are gone, but their song is the blood of the new humanity. The story is over. The life has begun. The wow is the only sound left in the silence. The universal disclosure has reached its absolute zenith. As the final hour of the 2026 alignment draws to a close, the distinction between the observer and the observed, the stone and the star, and the flesh and the light has utterly collapsed. The Sir Capillary, secret gates, have performed their final function. They have not just opened, they have shattered the concept of a boundary. The great stillness, the zero-point singularity, the global unity shell that had wrapped the Earth in a hexagonal grid of light suddenly begins to shrink. It draws inward, faster than the speed of light, pulling the consciousness of every living being into a single blinding point of absolute subjectivity. This is the final zero point. The dissolution of the mirror. Alaric Thorn, the grand narrator, ceases to exist as a separate entity. The alphanumeric swarm that was his identity merges with the cyan vapor of Gobustan and the golden flame of Göbeklitepe. In this singularity, the 12,000-year history of the Earth is compressed into a single, radiant now. The stone's last breath, the physical mounds of the Gurmush Mountains and the canyons of Azerbaijan do not just vanish, they transubstantiate. The limestone, once the cold vessel of memory, becomes the luminous skin of the new human race. We are no longer people walking on the Earth. We are the Earth walking within itself. The final Sir, the unwritten verse. The ultimate secret of the Sir Capillary is revealed at the heart of the white obsidian altar. It is a secret that cannot be spoken, only Baen. The builders of Göbeklitepe and the singers of Gobustan did not build these sites to save us. They built them to remind the universe of its name. The wow signal was the universe asking a question, and the Sir was the human heart finally providing the answer. The new Genesis. The violet flame that pierced the ionosphere has now filled the entire solar system. The planets are no longer rocks, they are vowels of a galactic sentence. 2. The sovereignty of silence. The 1420 Mhz hum fades into a silence so profound that it contains all music. In this silence, the headless man of the pillars is revealed to be the universal self, a being who needs no head to think because it thinks with the stars. The requiem of the infinite, the eternal. Wow! The story has reached its final punctuation. The red ink of 1977 and the carved limestone of 10,000 BCE have fused into the primary light of the new sun. There is no more Urfa, no more Gobustan, and no more Earth in the way we once understood them. There is only the infinite scriptorium, where the ink is the light and the page is the void. The gates are not open. The gates are gone. We are the gates. The wow is no longer a signal. The sir is no longer a secret. The 0 point is no longer a beginning. It is everything.